Throughout the 1960s and into the mid-70s was a classic era of big banger sports cars. Competing in events like the Le Mans 24 Hours and the North American Can-Am Series, these purpose-built sports races were, for a short time, very much considered a threat to the popularity of Formula One. In 2013, the Victorian Historic Racing Register invited a field of these cars to race at the annual Phillip Island Classic Festival of Motorsport. Widely regarded as one of the premier events of its kind in the world, the Phillip Island Classic attracts competitors and hardcore race fans from all over Australia and from across the globe. For race fans of a certain age, and I'm certainly one of them, the chance to see some of these remarkable machines in the flesh was just too good an opportunity to pass up. To see and hear cars like the Le Mans winning Matra 670B was a journey into a past that I never actually experienced. I've vivid memories of the famous Autosport cover featuring the car's win at the 1973 Le Mans with the all-French pairing of Henri Pescarolo and Gerard Larousse. All up the 670 won 3 times at Le Mans in 1972, 73 and 74. Its 3-litre V12 engine, as famous for its sweet but piercing exhaust note as it was for its reliability and performance. The Matra wasn't the only Le Mans winner at Phillip Island. The Porsche Museum was once again on hand to display 2 classic sports races of a different era, including this 936, the winner of the 1981 French Classic.
Well, the car to my right here is the Jules 936 from 1981, and it's an interesting story about this car because originally it raced in 76 and 77 and it was retired into the museum, in the Porsche Museum, and then Peter Schultz, the then boss of Porsche, decided we need a car to race in 81, we must win Le Mans in 81, so all they have is this car at the museum, so they take this car out of the museum and put the new generation water-cooled flat 6 engine in and some bodywork modifications. And X and Bell have a good run with this car and win the event for Porsche, 14 lap in front. So it works good. Good for this old car, works good. And it was the last of the Group 6 regulation. So then in 82 was the new Group C car, which they build a new car, 956. So this old car works well with the new engine and great drivers, and another victory for Porsche.
The interesting thing about this car and the Porsches in general at that time is that they were still space frame. They really were the last hangouts, obviously worked because they were enormously successful.
That's correct, yeah. This is the old technology frame, the space frame, the aluminium tube, all handmade of course. And then with the new regulation in Group C, they make the monocoque, the aluminium monocoque, all an aerodynamic, very aerodynamic car, so all new thinking. So this is the last of the older thinking, older technology, but it works well.
Tell us a bit about the engine.
The engine originally was developed for the Indy car on a methanol engine, and then the factory decide they need a new engine for the Moby Dick in 78, and they bring this engine with 4-valve, twin overhead cam, water-cooled heads and air-cooled cylinders, and they adapt it for petrol to run in Moby Dick. And then this engine is a progression for the 936. So they have this engine ready for 956. So, but the full car is not ready, so they take this engine and put it in the 936, and it works well.
Now the car that's alongside of it here today is the last of the prototype Porsches until we see next year, of course. That's the LMP2 car, the Spider. Tell us about that.
Well, this was the first generation.
And it's starting up.
Yeah, that's right. This is the first generation of the LMP2 car. So, yeah, it's a little bit noisy, but we take some photos of this and you can see where the technology from this car all carbon fibre, so it's a different thinking.
The North American Can-Am series of the late 1960s and early 70s is regarded by many as the pinnacle of sports car racing. Sure, there were rules, but they were very flexible, and they allowed some of the fastest and still most powerful circuit racing cars ever built. Phillip Island was a rare chance to see these amazing cars outside of the USA. The man who bought them here was Scott Dernick.
Well, the Can-Am was probably the most wildly American series because it was a no-limits series. The rules were you had to have 4 wheels, you have it at an engine that burned liquid fuel, and that was about it. You couldn't have movable aerodynamic devices. So the engines just got exponentially bigger. I mean, 9 liters is a pretty big engine. The tires are 19 inches wide on the rear. The cars have an incredible amount of power and torque. And, you know, the motto of the series they used to have in the day was that too much was barely enough.
You mentioned the McLegal that we're standing in front of at the moment. Tell us about that. I mean, very famous driver in Dan Gurney, and he never sort of left well enough alone. And as you say, he's modified this. Specifically, what are the features of this car?
Well, when they got the McLaren, it started out life as a regular McLaren M6, and they thought they could improve upon it. So the first thing you do with a race car is make it lighter. So they made lighter weight bodywork. They made a number of titanium components, that beautifully fabricated exhaust, the sand-bent titanium tubing, which in 1968 was pretty exotic. Making the car lighter worked very well for them. So emboldened by that, they changed the shape of the front bodywork, and that worked a little bit better too. After that, most of the modifications they did made the car slower. And at the end of the day, if you talk to people who worked on the car in period, the biggest takeaway they had from the whole experiment was that Bruce McLaren was a lot more clever than they thought.
When you think of classic Italian sports cars, you think of Ferrari. But Ferrari isn't the only great Italian marque in international sports car racing, far from it. Alfa Romeo has a long and proud history of great sports cars at Le Mans. Joe Nastasi is an Alfa Romeo lover from the United States, and he brought 2 stunning examples to Phillip Island.
My name is Joe Nastasi. I am from New York, Italian, and I've been collecting this Alfa Romeo for a long time, sometime back in 1985. I have a lot of those. We enjoy driving, representing the Alfa Romeo colors. And I was invited here in Australia. Very nice, very kind people. We enjoying the track and the weather, and you know, just for the sport, you know.
Tell us about the cars you brought out.
The cars I brought out were, this one here is a 12-cylinder, 1975 World Championship and 77, sponsored by Fernet Tonic. I purchased the car originally from Auto Delta in 1984, and I've always been restored and driving, enjoying. Beautiful car, easy to drive, lots of power, just old.
Sadly, Joe's weekend didn't turn out quite as he had hoped, as the T33 SC12 had engine problems and did too few laps for anyone's liking. In the late 1970s, the Sports Car Club of America came up with a bold plan to try and revive the golden days of the Can-Am series. The new era Can-Am cars were essentially rebodied Formula 5000s. The concept never really took off, despite featuring some of the biggest names in the sport and some pretty wild-looking cars, like the Lola T332 based Spider of New South Wales driver Andrew Kluver.
This was actually a car that was one of 3, 332, in this case CS, which is the Chaparral-based chassis, which was bought by Paul Newman and Bill Freeman, and they set up in Santa Barbara, a little garage, an old gas station, and they built about 3 of these cars. They're called Spider cars. To our knowledge, this is the only one that still exists in the world, and this is, as you can see, the Keke Rosberg car, which Keke was pretty notorious in terms of the way he drove it, and there's some great YouTube footage of it, but the car itself has been restored. We had an accident, burnt to the ground last year. We have since rebuilt it and it's in pristine condition. But the car as it is has probably only seen racing in the last 18 months from the ground up restoration that we did on it.
So one of the problems with the Can-Am, single-seat Can-Am era is, of course, that many of them started their lives as actual Formula 5000s. The fact that this has got another chassis underneath, does that make it integral that it's going to stay like this and not be broken up for a 5000?
Well, this one won't be broken up. And the reason it won't be broken up, as I said, I believe this is the only Spider in the world. I stand corrected, but I have done some pretty intensive searches. This car is also known as the John Corn car, which means it's got pedigree, so I can run it either way, but I wouldn't change it back. It's just the way the car is. It's also been driven by Bobby Rahal, Elliot Forbes Robinson, and as I said, Keke Rosberg I think he actually won the World Championship in it in '78.
Australia had its own era of big banger sports cars, names like Matic, Elfin and Renmax. This Renmax BN6 had been in the Gibson family for many years. Paul Gibson raced the car in the 1970s. This weekend at Phillip Island, his son Michael was given the chance to continue the family tradition.
It's a real honour, especially being in the family for so long and, growing up around this car and getting the opportunity to drive it. It's just like a childhood dream come true. And then to go on to next week and drive it at the Grand Prix is even a bigger buzz, so it's really good.
So for people who don't know the history of the Gibson family, especially around the Benalla area, I mean, one of the most famous racing families in Australia, really. Tell us the history of the family and also in particular how it relates to this car.
Yep. Well, it started with my grandfather, Hoot Gibson, and then my uncle Bevan, who was killed at Bathurst, and then tragically, and then my dad started racing in a Lotus 23, and then after that purchased this car, and he raced it for a few years. Then my uncle Grant, and then my uncle Carl, and then now I've finally got the opportunity to drive it. So it's just great. Yeah.
So the car was obviously around a lot longer before you were. I mean, tell us a bit about the history of it. What sort of car is it? When was it originally built?
Yeah, it was built by Bob Britton. It's a Renmax sports car with a 3-litre Repco Ram in it. Dad and Grant raced it in the Group A Sports Car Championship in the mid-70s and backed by Shell Sport back in the day. And I mean, they had a lot of success in it. The New South Wales Tourist Trophy and a lot of lap records through Victoria and New South Wales. So, yeah, a lot of history.
Australian race engineer Barry Locke is responsible for some of the fastest sports cars ever seen in Australia. Cars like Bap Romano's Kaditcha and the ex-Kevin Bartlett Di Tommaso, which was also seen at the island. But for years he was part of the all-conquering McLaren Can-Am juggernaut. McLaren dominated Can-Am racing. Only the might of Porsche could end one of the most dominant streaks in the history of world motorsport. Locke is still working on classic McLarens and still making them go fast.
My role was detail engineering, and at that stage Gordon Coppock was the chief engineer, responsible for all aspects of design and so on. And that was just after Robin Hurd, who was also very successful at McLaren's and put all the groundwork in place for these sort of motor cars.
So what's it like working on this car again?
Oh, it's absolutely fantastic. I love the motor cars. The sports cars are just great. In fact, at that stage, as I say, really the focus was upon the sports cars, and of course the results show that as well. But it's just great to be involved yet again. Yeah. This particular motor car is one of the Trojan-built motor cars. Trojan built the customer cars to our specs that were the previous year's works cars. And this particular car is probably the most original here in pit lane today. It uses absolutely identical components to the customer car at that time, and it was of course one of the most successful customer cars of the time as well.
It's a big lump of engine in the back. We sort of ooh and ah about the Formula 5000 and all this, but tell us about, this is a bit bigger than a 5-litre, I believe.
Well, yes, it is. When we were looking for more horsepower, as that was part of the game at the stage, of course, Reynolds came to the assistance with their 8-litre aluminium blocks, and this is basically it's the Reynolds 8-litre aluminium block. This one's 800 horsepower and, well, obviously very effective.
The fine weather, the great racing and the all-round atmosphere of the Island Classic make the meeting a must-see on the bucket list of any hardcore race fan. 2014 will be the event's silver anniversary. One wonders how they'll celebrate it. Silver, eh? Silver.